So I'm going to do both. I'm going to start the session and also monitor the room. So if I pause, it's just to let somebody in. And as I mentioned, I'm Cheryl McGraw, and I am the program manager for both funding programs for BC Live. And in terms of my role for both programs, I coordinate the information, but I'm not the decision maker. So I basically am the paper pusher, as they call it. I do the program guidelines, all the materials, and then I coordinate the meetings, and then I'm the one that actually notifies you. So I play that role and have done, I think, maybe for 8 years. I did it earlier in 1998, and the program certainly has changed since. So lots of different things have happened through the program, but essentially the same in that both programs fund artist fees. Just going to pause and let somebody else in here. So just let me get myself situated. I'm going to share my screen and talk about how I'm going to approach this. But first of all, I'd like to say BC Live, we serve the entire province. And our office is situated in Revelstoke. It's based in four different nations, the Sinaiaks, the Secwepemc, the Silks, and the Tunaka is the home of Revelstoke. But we do serve everybody in the province, and these programs really do serve very different communities, different sizes all over the province. And so we consider this a provincial organization. Can everybody see my screen? Maybe Linda, you could let me know. Yep. Okay, so what I was going to do today is start with community presenter assistance. And I know many of you are already current clients. I see people like David and Brent and Mary Louise that you all apply to this program every year. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are you probably already know, but some things I'm going to talk about what's new. I'm going to show you the online application, and I'm going to talk about I'm going to show you a sample of previous year's narrative and the application itself. And I'm going to talk about resources. And then you can ask questions. But the other thing I want to mention is if you don't get your question answered today, we can actually come back to you and answer it at any time. So there's lots of opportunity. And for community presenter assistance, the program deadline is June 15. So we've got lots of time to go through that information. So it's a partnership program of the BC Arts Council and the province of BC. Just making sure again that somebody saw me flip that. Linda, maybe you can give me the thumbs up. It's on the second. So if I flip forward, you're seeing it. Great. Just always these technology things, you have to make sure that you're not talking and people don't see what you're talking about. So BC Live supports the BC Arts Council's their foundational plans and their action plans, and they haven't done one, and mostly because of funding and funds available. They do like to do a consultation around the province, so we're still using the Extended Foundation's action plan from 2024. And if you haven't read that plan, it's a good idea to go and look at those things. And these are their designated priority groups. And so these come into play for every program we administer, even our own processes and some of the things like our showcases. And I really want to emphasize that when the assessment takes place, the assessors are looking for these designated priorities. And you'll notice that a lot of them pertain to the programming you're doing, but it's also located in the regional areas. So outside of Greater Vancouver and the Capital Regional District are the BC Arts Council's priorities. In the program guidelines, however, there are different priorities in terms of not funding Vancouver and Victoria. So I'll talk a little bit about those. The guidelines in the application, I put a little link in the chat. The new guidelines are out for both of our programs and the new online forms, which will be very exciting for people that don't really like Excel, but it may also pose challenges for some. So we'll walk through that as to how that will work. So what's new for CPA this year is that we've moved the application online, as I mentioned. We updated a slight different definition for cover or tribute bands because that just kept coming up over and over and over the last few years. So I'll mention what that is when we get going. The questions in the narrative. So this, I really want to point out how we've streamlined those questions. They're very similar to last year, but they're not identical. And that kind of changes a little bit in terms of when I'm showing you the sample. They were based on last year, but again, those questions are very similar. And we're just trying to streamline things so it's a little easier for you as the applicant. The scoring guidelines, also with that narrative, we made everything equal. Last year it was 50% for this, 25% for this, and 25%. And based on some of the panel's recommendations, we just made that a flat 33% for each. So eligibility, I think most of you know, you have to be a community-based arts organization. So arts have to be a primary objective in your incorporation documents, and you have to be a nonprofit in BC. And we do get a lot of inquiries about from collectives and other kinds of organizations. So it's important to know that. And we're still doing the presenting up to 3 eligible performing arts events on an annual basis. It's still compensation at professional rates. And the programming, again, we do a full year. So between June 15 and June 17, people do ask me, like, what if it's one day out? It's unfortunate, but you can't apply for anything outside of that period. You can still apply for also up to 20,000 per application. And we get lots of people who do and others that don't. And it's based on your artist fees.
Cheryl, I assume that that means 2027, not 2026.
We're in the 26-27 year, actually. Yeah, so it's all the way from June 15, 2026 to June 2027. And
Right,
again,
and
that's
the document says 2026.
oh, that's an error on my part. I will update that. Thank you, David. And then eligibility. So basically, when they're looking at your proposed programming, they just want to know that you're able to realize that program. And many of you in the room, that's not really an issue at all. The issue is a new applicant more so that they just want to know that you're able to realize that program. And your financial statements you have to provide for a previous year. If you don't have something from, say, your year ends May or June and it's not quite ready, you can send your previous year. And as part of your eligibility requirements, and this is really important to know, is that you have to provide that respectful workplace. If there's any question about it, it will be discussed at the assessment level. And, it won't be something that's based on rumors, but it would be something that is really including how you address that part of your application. And I'll go through that again as we get into the nitty-gritty of the application. So the activity period, I've got it correct there in that piece. So your proposed activity has to be between there. And also, if you received funding last year, you have to submit that final report. So it needs to come either before or with your application. So coming in late, it just really starts to slow down the whole process. And what we're trying to do is speed up the notification process because many of you say, I've already started my season. I just want to know if I have the funding. And all of the things we do is to try and increase that notification period so that you get notified sooner. Some of the exclusions, so we do not accept applications or activities based in Vancouver and Victoria. This has been a very long-standing exclusion for this program, probably 35 years. And it is because those municipalities have access to funding and larger audiences, often sponsors that are not available to somebody, for example, in Smithers. So it makes it a little bit more equal, and we do not have the funding to support all of the activities in those municipalities. Those who produce or present their own work are not eligible. So we've had inquiries about that, but that is something that we decided a few years ago. This is primarily presenting, and you're presenting artists that you are not necessarily working with to create that work. And I mentioned that in the third point there. It's not focused on creating or commissioning any kind of work. Festivals can apply, but those who don't present a series or a year-round series are not eligible. And then I mentioned that programming outside of the eligible activity period. So we have two programs, and so when you apply to CPA, if you're applying for Into the Act, you can't apply to both programs. In other words, there's no double dipping. And so this year, what we're going to do with Into the Act is if you're applying to Into the Act, you're not going to include it in your CPA application. It starts to be too convoluted for the assessment. They're not sure which is being applied for where. So we're going to separate that based on their recommendation. Of course, we don't support non-Canadian artists or non-professional, and by that we mean things like community choirs and that highly commercial artist. And they may be somebody who's achieved real success in their career in terms of financials, or they be really well known. And a good example of that would be Jan Arden. If they see that in your series, that is something that they would question whether they need funding for that. And then all those non-performing presentations that you do, including things like films or lectures or fashion shows or workshops or master classes, even those are not eligible for support. It's just your performances. So, in case there's any question about that. So, I mentioned the covered or tribute bands definition. So, this year we changed that. Used to say that cover or tribute bands were not eligible. But there were some discussion with the assessment panel and post awards that there were a lot of cover or tribute bands that were doing something very original and they should be considered. So again, based on assessment panel recommendations and some of the feedback we had from the applicants themselves, we changed that to that they can apply, but they if they don't have originality or are not unique or creative, they would not be eligible. And that would again be up to the assessment panel to decide that. So that's not me who would make that recommendation. We do allow splits of the door, but where you can't apply is if there's no guaranteed fee. So you'd have to include the fee, and then mentioning that there is a split in your application. If an artist has appeared in your season for more than 2 consecutive years, they're not eligible. And then any staff that are performing as part of your series are not eligible. And then we also include things like if it's part of a competition or a conference or a gala, fundraising events, family or religious celebrations, they're not eligible. And just to clarify, family day events are not included in this. This really refers to if you're hosting a family event and you're putting on a concert as part of that. You cannot apply for that. So now I'm just going to move over to the maximum assistance. So 50% for BC artists, 50% for Canadian, and zero for non-professional or international artists. And that will come into play as you enter your information into your proposed presentation, your table or your spreadsheet. So the new form is now online and it's a link on our website or it's also in the guidelines. So you can just access that directly. You don't need a password. You don't need an account. It's just a link that you would go to and start to complete the application. You can save the information or return to it. You can attach files and you can attach files. This is actually, I think, not the updated version. One thing I noticed is the when you do want to save it and return it, you don't have to have an account with them. You can just save it. It'll send you an email that we've saved your application. Click on this link and return to there. You can complete it. And as well, I provided a couple of worksheets. So if you want to just cut and paste a whole bunch of text into something, then you can do that with the online form. And I'll show you that form once we get to the end. So in your performance list, you're going to list all of your performance, even if you're not eligible. Um, Things like international artists, we like to know if you're presenting them. Um, just for the giving the whole picture of what's going on in your organization. It really helps the assessment panel to know that these aren't just the only performances that you're doing. And again, that I mentioned that the Into the Act, if you're applying to that, we don't want to see that as part of your CPA application. The other thing is don't list the series because that really just starts to make everything like tiny, tiny print and is not relevant to the what the assessment panel is looking at. So it's best just to leave those off. If you have a run of a show, we just list the first date. We don't necessarily need to know each and every performance that you're doing. for your projected attendance. You're just estimating for each show. That number again is something that we collect, and we are able to say to the Arts Council that this is how many audience members are being served through the program. And the eligible dollar amount is the really important key piece here. So if you've got an artist you're presenting for 5,000, it would be 2,500 as long as they're BC and Canadian. So that gets entered into that spreadsheet. The maximum you can apply for each event is $5,000. So keep that in mind as you're filling that information out. If you have a show, if you're presenting, for example, Access Theatre and they have the name of a show, because many companies have more than one, we just like to know if it's what kind of show it is. Is it they're presenting the Romeo and Juliet or anything like that. What we do with the information is we put it together in one big spreadsheet. And I compile, like, there was last year 867 shows, and it really helps to know if it's the same show being toured through the province. And that's the reason for asking for that information. Also helps the assessors know which show is being toured. This comes up a lot about the diversity designated priority groups. So there is a column in that. You have to complete it. It's a drop-down menu, and it will allow you to identify those designated priority groups. And if you don't know, and a lot of people say, I don't feel comfortable asking the artist, I'm not sure if they are or not. Often it will be in their promo material. They'll self-identify that way, so you don't actually have to ask them. It's either obvious or it's not. And if you don't know, you can always put NA. A lot of the people that are sitting on these assessment panels are artists, so they often know the artist or their presenters themselves, so they might have experience with the artists as well. The contract versus tentative, I will say that last year this became a little bit more of an issue with people listing a lot of tentative performances. And should that happen, the panel could make the decision that you need to confirm all of those artists before you could receive your award. So the more you have booked, the better. Co-pros. So if you are doing a co-pro, just list the guaranteed fee that you are paying. You don't have to list it if what your partner or who else you're working with. Just list the guaranteed fee on the form. And the US, as I mentioned, the US or international, you can include it, but make sure you list $0. That is something that I go through everybody's application, and then last year had to make a lot of changes to that. And it means people then put in their eligibility amount, and it's I have to go back to them and tell them they're not actually eligible for that amount. So just be careful as you're filling out that form, that piece of the form. The artist fee is the total fee you're paying to the artist, and this comes up, questions come up about travel and accommodation. So we've just clarified in the last few years that only the fee, you put the total fee if you're paying the artist directly for things. So if you're paying them for airfare as part of their fee or a ferry, you can include it. But if you're paying that directly to the vendor or supplier, then you would not include that. So it's whatever's in your agreement. And then the final report. So how we use the final reports is it's still in an Excel spreadsheet at this point. It's got 4 worksheets, things like you want to collect testimonials from artists and audience and some images or video links. And how we use these, and BC Arts Council loves these. They love our impact series. It helps to get the word out about what's been funded through the programs. It helps new applicants look at whether they might be eligible for the program, but it also just brings everything to life. So really important at this point, I am telling people that we won't accept your final report without them, because it's been 3 years since we've been asking, and people are still sending just one image and it's blurry, and so these are required. These are definitely required as part of your final report. So your support materials is really for CPA is one financial statement, is really all we're asking for. And some people have asked me about the artist fees. And of course, we want to look at the financials and see that there's grants. We may not be singled out, but we understand These are the grants, and this is the line item for that. And we want to see the corresponding artist fees. So if there's not, I might ask you about that just because it needs to be obvious. If BC Arts Council is audited, they do look at financials. So, and we don't need a signature of an accountant or a bookkeeper, but your board should have approved those financials. And I give you a quick tip, if you don't have them from this year, you can send last year. So it's pretty simple. Application, final report, if it's applicable to you, and a financial statement. And we do try to keep these applications as simple as possible. Again, there's worksheets for you to use to draft your answers to the narrative or put all your stuff in a spreadsheet that you can just cut and paste it in. So a couple of quick tips from me is that you just want to make sure you're submitting your accurate information. Really, once we start the process of review and assessment, it's impossible to kind of change applications as we go. And there's so many that it would be really onerous on the assessment panel. So just try to put in your best foot in your application and review those proposed dates to make sure they're within the eligible activity period. As you can see, I put in a wrong date today, so I'm telling you to do something that I didn't even do, but it is important for the assessment panel to know it's within that period because they do look at that. And again, those eligible artist fees. So making sure that you've got just the maximum of 5,000 and you've got the correct amounts in there. So I review your application for accuracy, completeness. It goes to the panel, and they are a panel of 4 people who include presenters, artists, agents, managers, people who have experience with either presenting or touring in the province. And they take about 3 weeks to review and score your application. So we do meet with them. We go over the assessment process. They go off, they do their work. We all come back and we do meet over 2 days. So it's their expertise is reflected in, again, we look for people who've got a lot of expertise in terms of presenting, geographical representation. We also put out a call. So if you want to be on a panel, which is a very good experience, then you can be. You just need to submit that application, and we put the panel together in May. So this year I mentioned that the scoring is all level, so 33.3% on each of those narrative questions. So if you haven't downloaded the guidelines yet, do and look at those questions. Those will be how your application scored. They do review your season. They do look for the BC Arts Council's priorities. So that's important as well. But those narrative questions are really key for how it's assessed. And these, I put them in here, but we won't go through them. I'll let you look at them. They're slightly changed from last year. And they've got the similar objective in just describing how you do your programming, how you measure effectiveness, how you address diversity, equity, inclusion in not only your programming, but in your organization. This year we added this capacity rather than just feasibility, but capacity was something that was really focused on last year. They really want to ensure that we're giving the funding to organizations who are strong organizations who've got longer term sustainability. So that has been reflected in the changes this year. And then you submit to me by June 15 at 5 p.m. You'll get an automatic receipt saying that it's been received, and then I will follow up with you if I need any other information. This kind of gives you the timeline of the year. So normally we'd actually put the applications out in May, but this year we've done it in April just to give you a bit more time. June 15 is the deadline. In June, we follow up. In July, in August, they're reviewed. And then the committee's meeting in mid-August this year. So by early September, you should know. I'm hoping by around September 3rd or 4th that we could get an email out to you to let you know. Some of the resources that we have available are on our website. We have an FAQ. We have a whole PDF that lists all of the artist fees from last year that gives you an aggregate number of an average. I was caution people about using that as a baseline because with artist fees, as many you know, the fees can be changed on variables like how many are in the group, where they're coming from, how long they're playing. Are they doing anything else while they're there, like a master class or a workshop? So those fees are there just for a reference, not necessarily as a guideline in terms of what you should be um, paying artists. There's an eligibility and exclusion checklist. There's recording of these info sessions. You can book a meeting with me, either by phone or Zoom, or you can email me or call me as well. So lots of resources. And I'll put one more in the chat once I'm through this that is on our website. How you acknowledge funding. Once you've received notification, if you're awarded, we do ask that you download the logos and make sure you have them on current logos. So I've seen people with the BC Touring Council logo. Always nice for BC Arts Council to see those logos on things. They do send their MLAs out to things. It's always nice to see them on socials as well. We do notice, we do like, we do share, we do follow. So as much as you can. That's really appreciated by all of the funding bodies. That's the first time applicants, and I will stop sharing that. And I mentioned that we put together a resource on our website that is about DEI learning tools. So many organizations I met with last year, I'm just going to put that in the chat. I do feedback sessions as well. So we don't give you written feedback in your notification. And that is because often it's really tough for us to kind of put things in writing that are, need a discussion around them. Somebody just wait room there. So I meet with you and we go over the whole program in terms of how many applicants, how many were successful, how many received 100%, how many received nothing, just so you have a context in which you're receiving feedback. And then I can give you specific feedback on your application. But I always say to people this, the program seems to be becoming more and more competitive every year. We've gone from having 48 applications to having almost 80. So the program demand is there. And we can't fund everybody. We just don't have the resources for that. So it's really important to pay attention to that narrative and also the designated priorities. We're also really emphasizing the rural and remote. So if you're from outside of the Metro Vancouver and the Capital Regional District, you should be ranking a little higher than some of the organizations within, only because that's a designated priority of the BC Arts Council. And we want to also ensure that money gets spread throughout the province. And that has been something that I think last year we didn't quite get there. So we're going to try to make sure this year we're making sure that we have people on the committees that are regional. It's sometimes hard to get that because we do find whoever applies, and we've asked many people to be on the assessment panels who don't either have the time or can't just can't do it this year. So those panels are really key for us, and we really take the time to curate that in a sense that we put the best panel we can forward for each program. Sorry, I'm just gonna. Okay. So I see a question in the chat, and yeah, well, how about I answer the chat questions, and then Mary Louise, I see your hand up. I can take some other questions. Okay. Barb, who decides if an artist has achieved significant financial success and what are the criteria? Well, that's a good point. They have a discussion around it, and often being presenters or artists themselves, they kind of know in terms of the whole definition. It's if you're financially successful, if you're also very well known. So in the case of Jan Arden, we know we don't look at her financials, but we know she's been financially successful in her career. She's had many opportunities. We do see some of those artists come through. We see what they're charging. So that's another good indicator. If you're a $20,000 artist, you may not need CPA funding for and often they sell out. So there's no definite criteria around looking at their financials. It's a discussion at the assessment panel, and they make that decision in terms of whether they believe, based on the definition, that artist has achieved that. And again, those artists often sell out at your theaters. So not not a lot of discussion. Sometimes they automatically know. In some cases, they've won significant awards or they have, gone in their careers. They're just so well known that they don't need CPA funding. What is the difference between Into the Act and BC Arts Council? Well, BC Arts Council is the funding body. So, Peter, that's a good question, but BC Arts Council provides the funding for Into the Act. So, they are the funder, we are the delivery for Into the Act. If you're questioning the difference in the program, I can speak to that next because I'm going to go right into the act right after this. So I'll wait on that question. If you want to know more about the program, you can stay on the meeting. Next question. I have a question about whether you can apply for BC Live as well as BC Gaming. Absolutely. We have no restrictions. You can apply for BC Arts Council Arts Touring. The only thing is you can't double dip. So if you get funded by BC Arts Council, you can't be funded by CPA for the same programming. So essentially, but BC Gaming, there's no restriction on that. So don't listen to what other people tell you, by the way. I get all kinds of people saying, "Oh, this presenter told me." It's like, no, go right to the source in any funding program because people get their wires crossed and they mean well. But I think you're better often to go to the source of the funding to find out the information than you are to listen to other people in your community who mean very well and they want to help, but often don't have clear information or current. Was under the impression that LGBTQ artists were a priority. Queers Fund. Did that change? So they've never been in terms of the other equity seeking groups in our organization have never been a priority for the BC Arts Council. And again, those priorities are listed on their website, and that is not a priority. We do collect that information to inform them of what other types of other equity seeking groups, but definitely not one of their designated priorities. Okay, I think I answered everybody.
I believe it
Oh,
was in year. I believe it was in years past.
it may have been. I
But yeah, it's
was
changed.
thinking
It's
I
changed
took over.
3 or 4 years ago. I think it changed.
Yeah, I took over in 2022, and since then not. So it may have been before that, before COVID time, I would think. But the priorities of the BC Arts Council is what we use, and I'm just trying to find that link if I can, um, and just put it in the chat there. This again, it could change in the future, but for this year and as we're moving in this program, that's still the priority. The four priority groups are listed there on that link in the chat. And the link is also in the guidelines. So again, just being aware of what their priorities are, um, and it will come into play in terms of assessment when they're looking at your programming. Mary Louise? Oh,
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to unmute. Thanks so
yeah.
much, Cheryl. So I just want to, when you mentioned that, priority with rural and remote, my understanding from this is that, you cannot apply if you are based in the Greater Victoria area or the Greater Vancouver area.
Um,
So when you
no,
say
actually,
that,
it is the municipalities of Vancouver and Victoria to clarify. So the BC Arts Council priority is outside of those regions, but for the programs, it's just Vancouver and Victoria. So somebody in West
okay,
Van can apply, somebody in Coquitlam can apply, somebody in Sook could apply, but it's just
to
those
to
two
BC
municipalities.
Live. To
Yeah,
BC Live. Oh,
yeah,
that's where I was always confused. Okay, I
yeah.
got
So
it. So
again, that
that's what
BC
people are doing.
Right. So
Okay.
that priority from BC Arts Council is they prioritize outside of those two regional areas.
Hmm.
Our programs are specifically Vancouver, Victoria.
Okay, so then the
Yeah.
rural, for instance, right, which is not West Van or North Van,
Right.
Burnaby, right, or even Nanaimo or,
Yep.
Prince George, like a number of those. So then the additional sort of priority aspect is if you really are outside of an urban center of a certain size, then that is taken
Yeah,
into
it comes
consideration.
into play when the panels look at distribution of funding. So they have a
Okay.
discussion about when they get to, and if anybody's ever been through that, there's a whole process that they use. We use a big ranking sheet. All the scores go in, we rank it. They look at how things are ending up, and then they decide based on also geography comes into play, designated priority. So those scores really are how they just determine funding allocation.
Okay.
And they will look at that. They will consider, are the top 10 in Metro Vancouver? Because if so, we have to relook at this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they will reevaluate and then come back with here's how we want to distribute the funding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
one other question when you're putting in the full fee, right, for the artist, that with some people that will include, so you're saying like their travel and per diem, right, which then pushes up that amount that the jury is seeing, right?
Mhm.
That is their fee, whereas others who do it separately, you
Mhm.
won't get that, not inflated fee,
Yeah.
but you won't get that same level of fee. Is there room in the narrative somewhere to really explain that, yes, this is their artist fee, but we also cover their, per diem and accommodation
Yep.
and stuff? Because otherwise you're
Yes.
seeing a false high fee compared
Yeah.
to others, right?
Well, yeah, and where it comes more into play is when you've got an organization like Haida Gwaii or Fort St. John or somewhere where it's very expensive for traveling
Hmm.
to those more really remote
Hmm.
locations. Often will pay the artist travel as part of their fee instead of
Hmm.
trying to arrange to pay BC ferries or trying to arrange an air ticket. It's often easier. So it's just become put it all in the agreement. And if you're paying that to the artist, you can put
Great.
that in your,
Okay. So
yeah.
even if it's like they're, yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah,
They're
we
paying.
don't need to know. We don't ask for the
Right.
breakdown of what you're paying the artist. It's kind of a
Right.
good thing. We don't want to get too prescriptive. Otherwise, we get
Fair
into
enough.
you're going to have to break everything down. And
Okay.
we've eliminated the budget in this program. Years ago, you used to have to give a very, very detailed budget, like what you're
Yes.
spending on marketing, what you're
Yeah.
spending on this. So this just kind of simplifies it for everybody.
All
And
right. So the
yeah,
reimbursements then that you're giving will be included in that
if you're
fee.
paying it to the
Yeah.
artist for them to book,
Yeah.
then it is part of their fee.
Perfect.
That's how
Thank
it's
you.
been viewed. Yeah.
Okay.
And
I know
some do it, some don't, but that's a practice that we don't. We're just saying that's what we do for
Okay.
this program, and that's up to you as the presenter.
Okay. Now, one last question. I'm sorry to be I think maybe jumping a bit too much here, but you say that there's managers, etc., on the juries, right? Which I
Yep,
sort of get.
artist
Um,
representatives, I should call them. Yeah,
okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So, and but again within the narrative, right? Because now artists with BC Arts Council and Canada Council, right, can apply for their own travel costs, etc., right? So
Mhm.
I guess it's just very important in the narrative then to make sure that, like, for instance, the artists that I bring, I confirm they're coming. Some of them apply for their travel, right? Which is
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
But if they don't get it, they're still coming, right? So some of these representatives, etc., might know some kind of details in there that aren't, they might say, well, no, no, we're paying for all the travel, or we're like, or, I like I'm just a little, I guess, just wanting to make sure that our information, like, is not maybe being questioned. But then
Yeah.
I guess
So
if I'm presenting an artist and that manager is on the jury, they should step off or something, right? Is that
yeah,
what?
there's
All
absolutely.
right.
So there's a lot of conflict in our networks because a lot of people work together. So there's often times where if you as an applicant sit on there, you have to leave the space while they discuss.
Yeah.
You're not
Okay.
actually involved in any part of it. You don't see your
Mhm.
score till we get you to approve the distribution. So essentially you're not involved in any of that. So if an artist, we'll call them an artist representative, has an artist they're working with, they would not be involved in that. They
Yeah.
would actually see blacked out scores through the whole
Mhm.
process. They
Mhm.
don't have any input into the discussion about whether they get funded. So, yeah, there's a whole process around conflict of interest,
Yeah.
and people have to identify that. We try not to get too many people on it because it becomes like they have to leave the room every time we talk about it, and they're coming in and out. So we try to limit the conflicts, but there are definite, like we're a network of people that work together, many of us very collaboratively. You might work with artists, you might work with agents, you might work with, so there is conflict. And there's a whole process, and we follow the BC Arts Council's process, so they don't have any input. and they're not allowed to discuss. They don't review your application. So it kind of limits that. But I will say too, we don't bring in information about your application that's not in the application. So in other words, I don't say, oh, I know this about so and so.
Mhm.
There's no rumors, there's no like added information. It's what's there is presented, is what we look at. So
Thank you.
yeah,
Thanks.
Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that with the $5,000 cap on artist fees, I don't think we're going to have to worry about. I mean, a lot of the artists we're bringing in are more than $5,000 exclusive of travel. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see it
It
as being.
depends. Like some of the applicants are the bigger theaters, so they might have. And I think last year one of our biggest fees was 35 or $40,000 for one artist, not eligible because they were more of a commercial act. And some present, and it's okay to mention this. We bring in commercial acts to help us sustain our operation. They pay the bills, but we also do this kind of programming to be fair. If you are presenting a lot of commercial acts, it's okay to speak to why. Is it, have your audience asked you to do that? It's also okay if you're a theater to speak to some of the rentals. Like we try to not program things that are rentals. All of those things in the narrative really helps just to explain where you're coming from, what you're curating. So that they have an understanding. What I was going to do is just show you a quick sample of, if I could, just of a narrative last year. And what I did was I removed all the identifying information. But I was just going to show you this because I felt like it was one of those very powerful. They did receive their full funding. Just let me share that. And I'll just address a couple of things about it. Um, And keep in mind, and I'm showing you this, we're not going to send it out because what we don't want is everybody copying and pasting it and changing a few words, okay? So what I'm going to show you here is this is last year's questions, but what they did, right? They've talked about their history of their performance. Now this is all within 500 words as well. So you don't want to get too flowery in your language, but just address the things that so how they curated, like we achieved this series through this. What our seasons typically cover, right? How do we program? Where do we get the artists? Where do we find artists? Do we work in the block booking? Do we go to shows ourselves? Do artists approach us? So just that curation piece, right? That like, how are we programming? Why you're bringing these performances to your residents? What's your overarching goal? So they talked about their overarching goal being equity, diversity, inclusivity, and accessibility. And those things are definitely, as you know, BC Arts Council. And then they address it, right? As a standard procedure, we regularly meet to discuss the whole mix of programming. Um, they talked about how they're expanding those boundaries. Question number 2, they address it directly um, through their programming. They talk about the engagement and impact. They talked about how it serves their community. They talked about how they promote the shows to those communities to build new audiences. So addressing some of those things like how are you engaging young people? How are you engaging seniors? How are you engaging people underserved in your community? How do you make people feel welcome to your venue, to your concerts, to your shows? How do you like again that how you're promoting them and how you're doing the outreach in your community is super important. They talked about the timing of their performances in this. Their matinees reach out to older audiences. They do a discount through their classical series pass. Um, if I meet with you one-on-one, we could go through this a little bit more in detail, and I have a couple of other samples as well. They talk about the tourists versus the residents, how it affects local business. So they're really nailing everything in their communities. And one thing to note is like these people on the panel are from BC. They are familiar with your community or they've toured to your community, but they kind of want to get a little insight into how do you engage with your community. Are you talking to people? Are you surveying people? When people come to the show, do you collect any kind of information from them? How does it affect the people around you in terms of the location if you're a venue? Like what's that doing for your community in terms of the local business? And they talked about here over the past few years, they built community networks with their relationship with their First Nation culture manager. If you don't have a First Nation in your community, it is trickier, and that will be something you need to address. Is how, if you do not have directly a First Nation, how do you go about engaging with them? If it's a regional or you can actually talk about things you do within your organization as well. But your programming should reflect the community. Feasibility, we've changed a little bit of this, but they've talked about, they're on their 34th season, who their committee leaders are, who they've got on their board, who they, what kind of background people, what kind of skills do people bring to the whole programming and organization, how they benefit from sharing administrative resources with other organizations, like collaboration in your community. And again, in the case of somebody like Mary Louise, you may not have a lot of different organizations in the community to engage with, but if you do and you're in a bigger center, then it would be beneficial for you to explain those collaborations, those partnerships, those who are you working with in your community. And then your workplace standards. So this did come up last year quite a bit. People want to read this in your application. They want to know what you do as an organization is how you're creating inclusivity, what your standards are of working with artists. Like what do you do as an organization with your volunteers? Do you train them to actually work with audiences and artists? How about your board? What kind of training has your board had? We actually did remove the word cultural competency because we felt like it was tripping people up a lot, maybe not understanding what that meant. But it is that idea that you're being trained, that there's some understanding of what it is to work with artists that are not necessarily artists you normally work with. And if it's Indigenous artists, it's what kind of information do you pass along to your sound people, your production people, to your volunteers, front of house, all of those things. So, and then in the nice way, they sort of end this saying that, part of that, what they do is they bill it and they have artists come and share a meal with them, which is a great way of building a relationship with an Indigenous artist or others. So they do that full sort of experience for an artist. And, it shows that they really do care about what they're doing. They're not just putting on a show and selling tickets, but it's about that inviting people into your community and making them feel welcome. So they've done they did a great job. They got the full funding. They addressed everything. There's 3 points in each question. Just make sure you address those things, address those answers. And it doesn't have to be flowery. It can be very succinct, and it should be. Because as you know, when you read 70 applications, your brain starts to everything starts to sound the same. So it's just important to be succinct. This is what we do. This is why we do it. And this is how we do it. And this is the outcome. And I'm certainly willing to help you with this. I can look it over and say, you haven't addressed this. I won't be able to say whether the panel would give you funding based on your answers. That's not something I can do, but I can certainly help you say that you didn't address this part, or I would hone in a little bit more on this if it's necessary. I know many of you in the room are very good writers and you do a great job, but sometimes for the new people, it's helpful for them to have feedback. Okay, that's it for me on community presenter assistance. Again, when you have questions, you can email me, call me, meet with me. One thing I was going to do, wasn't I? Just let me do this quickly before I shut down. I was just going to run through the application, but it is the same as the Excel spreadsheet. Difference is it's online. So you're just going to fill out these. I have a little video I'm going to post of how I actually completed the application, so you can follow that as well. It's all the same information as on the Excel spreadsheet. Nothing's different at all. We're asking for staff, full-time staff, volunteers. So again, if you've done this before, oh, see, it won't let me do that. And this is the performance season. So this one's a little different, only in that it's not an Excel spreadsheet. But as you go down and you fill out and complete your list, now I was going to mention this because I saw David in the room. I only put 50 columns, David. So if you run into, you've got more than 50 shows, we're in trouble. I might have to get you to do an Excel spreadsheet. I think some of it was your Into the Act last year. So again, you're not including Into the Act in this. It's just your artist, their contractor tentative. They're just pull down menus to make it easy for you. Many of these are already populated. So you can see you just have to pull down the menu and complete the columns. And then down here, it adds it up for you. There is a scroll bar here at the bottom, but this will all be added up for you. You don't enter anything. And then the narrative is here. This year, the narrative, this is why we did it, is because people were sending us 1,500 words per. And then I had to go back to them and get them to shorten it, and it still came out to 1,000. So we had to limit it. It's just based on the assessment panel saying, I won't even read past 500 words. So this will limit your number of words. And then you're going to complete this information. There's 3 boxes. And then you're just going to attach your financial, and you can review your answers. And when you review them, then you just hit the submit button once it's. You can save it, as I mentioned. If you want to save it, you can get a link to go back, or it will send you an email. It will also send you an email, just letting you know that you will that you'll be able to come back and continue your application. So again, it's exactly the same as the Excel spreadsheet. It's just done online. So there's really not a lot of change there in terms of what we're asking. Yeah. So I think that's it. Is anybody staying on for Into the Act? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so I'll end the CPA. Again, you can email me with questions as you go along. If you want to meet, I can meet with you before the deadline, well before the deadline, so you have lots of time. Great, okay. So I'm just going to switch gears here. And I put the Into the Act information in the chat as well at the very beginning. I know sometimes I talk so fast through these. I feel like I give people a bit of a whirlwind, but it is at the top. I'll put it there again. If you haven't downloaded the guidelines are there now, as well as the link to the form. And I'm just going to run through this fairly quickly. Some of it will be information that's